Welcome to Modern Home Masterminds with Bespoke Brokers. I'm Shauna Glazier, designated broker and owner.
And I'm Brittany Williamson, associate broker. Shauna and I are Bespoke Real Estate, but we're also your guides to modern luxury across the entire state of Arizona.
Each week, we chat with masterminds shaping the modern spaces. Do you want to get a behind-the-scenes look at your design build team's processes? Well, open communication and teamwork will lead you to a successful project.
From architects to builders, designers, and more, let's explore the art of modern living together.
All right, welcome back. How does an architect that trained at the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture design spaces that don't just function, but feel? Today, we dive into the mind of architect Wendell Burnette to explore how he crafts environments and leaves a lasting impression.
That's right. Wendell is an award-winning architect known for his thoughtful, experiential approach to design. His work is deeply rooted in understanding of place, materiality, and light. As the founder of Wendell Burnette Architects, he has created a diverse portfolio spanning private residences, public spaces, and cultural institutions, each reflecting his commitment to crafting spaces that not only function but evoke emotion. His designs have been recognized internationally for their ability to harmonize with the surrounding landscape while offering a deeply human experience.
Welcome, Wendell.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to talk to you. All right, your biography mentions that you are primarily self-taught, yet you also trained at the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture at Taliesin West. Can you share what that educational journey was like and how it helped you shape your approach to design?
Well, I knew very early that I wanted to be an architect when I was very young, and I got serious when I was 13, and I was designing and drawing and doing construction documents from 13 on, and I was very focused on architecture already, and you mentioned I went to Taliesin. I did apply to some universities, but I had already been working with an architect in high school, my senior year, 30 hours a week. I was supervising somebody with a master's degree in architecture already, and so I thought maybe I want to just continue doing it. And I always loved the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I also worked with someone who had gone to the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture. So I interviewed with Mrs. Wright in May of 1980 when I was still in high school, and she said, "How soon can you start?" And I was on a Greyhound bus a month later from Nashville, Tennessee, where I was born and raised, up to Spring Green, Wisconsin, to join the fellowship at Taliesin East. And then I had already been out here for an interview, and when I came out here permanently to live in a tent, which is a kind of a sheep herder's tent, a white pyramid of canvas.
Is this our listener?
I think we have photos
yes,
from that time period.
Yes, and that was my shelter that I designed, which is interesting in the context of other shelters. It was, I didn't have any money, and so the idea was just to cast the slab to the shape of the tent with 4 anchor bolts, one in each corner, flatten the steel tubes, and then some Velcro lift up the flap so I could sleep under the stars on the right-hand side there. And this is how I dress sometimes. And I hiked the McDowell Mountains. I was an avid hiker, and I just, it was paradise living in the desert and living under the stars and really getting to know the desert, and very quickly fell in love with the desert and this place, which I think the strongest identity of this place is the landscape, is the Sonoran Desert. And so I always knew I would come back here and practice. And so I did go back to Nashville 2 years after I left Taliesin West. I was there for 3 years. I always say it was, the greatest thing about being there was to live in 2 masterworks on a daily basis and not just visiting and taking pictures or sketching, but really understanding that architecture is a living thing, and how Wright kind of reinvented himself from Taliesin East in the desert at age 70 and defined a whole new architecture, but the architecture is resonant with that place and always about innovation and those lessons, also the spaces in between, like you see in this set of images. I realize that architecture is how you arrive from a distance by foot or by car, and also the spaces in between, i.e. the outdoor spaces, and especially here in the desert, we can create spaces that engage the landscape, and we're not sealed up in an air-conditioned bubble. When I went back to Nashville, I worked for 3 years, and this was during postmodernism. Postmodernism was reigning. I was not a fan of postmodernism. I was a fan of modernism, and maybe more specifically critical regionalism, or architecture without architects that goes way, way back. Just the continuum of architecture is always, it's modern always in some sense, especially if you look at vernacular architecture. And so this is one reason I didn't go to university, and I just wanted to keep doing it, and went to Taliesin. And then during postmodernism, I noticed there was an architect, Will Bruder, that was published only 2 pages in a magazine, architecture magazine. Bisbee, Arizona was on the cover. And I said, this is somebody I want to work with. And then I came out, interviewed with Will. And while a year later after I met him, I called, he wanted to hire me. And I also lived in the Dome in the Desert, which is a project that I emulated when I was 13, 14 on my drafting table, and I ended up living there.
So we have a picture of that Dome in the Desert.
Yes. And then... So
where is that? Tell our listeners where that was
That
located.
is in Cave Creek. Okay. It's still there. Mm-hmm. I was just recently there, and there's a couple of edges that are kind of rough, but it's actually in very good condition. And the new director or CEO of the Cosanti Foundation is actively thinking about restoring it and trying to work with the people that bought it unknowingly. That's another story. But the kind of my education, and getting back to your original question, which it is all of that, and then kind of my master's education was working with Will Bruder for 5 years, and then deciding when we got the Central Library to stay on another 6 years, a total of 11 years. Mm-hmm. The last 6 years was as co-designer, project and field architect on the Phoenix Central Library. And I was, at the time, I designed my house. And
I think we have a picture of both the library and then, so these are...
Yeah, these are images of the house under construction, and I was an owner builder, hired very good craftsmen, friends, and family. We designed the house in 1988, published in the Progressive Architecture Young Architects issue in 1990, when we had gotten the Phoenix Central Library. Mm-hmm. And then I constructed this on nights and weekends while I was the field architect on the Phoenix Central Library. Wow. And I started in October of 95 and October of 94. Started in October of 94, finished in October 95. Started my own practice in May of 96. So we're coming up on 29 years.
Would you say building your own house or designing it gave you the confidence to branch out, to start your own firm?
Well, what gave me the confidence to start my own firm was I also did construction management and had the idea to do construction management when I was with Will, and said we should start building the houses ourselves. So we wore the architect hat and also wore the construction manager hat. So I was doing that pretty much my whole time with Will, the first 5 years, and then continued as the field architect on the Central Library. So the idea of building a mound house I already had a lot of experience, and I had also had that experience at Taliesin as well. I was involved in construction a third of the time. Wow. So building and thinking about building and crafting a building is something that I've always had an interest in, and it's very much something that drives my work, is understanding how one builds and how one builds well, and how the material culture of a place and how one engages the material culture of a place and engages the available crafts people and materials that are in that place is always something that's very early in the thinking on any project.
Which is great. I don't know that happens with all architects, to have that kind of building background and mindset. I mean, our design, the people that we know that do design and build, of course, but people that are, they're just architects.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing to be clear about it doesn't inhibit me. It's how it's like, how do you prepare a beautiful dish or a beautiful meal if you don't know the ingredients and how they work together, or how they might be local or locally sourced, and then also the people that put love into those materials and how they're crafted, that is felt as a human experience in architecture. Is it resonant with place? Is it resonant in the way it's crafted, that you can feel that care and that, that love in a way? I think you can feel that.
Yeah, that kind of leads right into my next question, which was that you do seem to have a focus on this full experience of a place in your work. How do you balance that with functionality? How do you balance that feeling with functionality?
Well, I often say that apparently conflicting things can be mutually inclusive, and so that poetics and something being aspirational, or you feel something in your gut, you have a visceral connection with it. I think that is the role of architecture. It's also the role of architecture to be functional. And we say about our work that it is at once functional and poetic. And those are not mutually exclusive. They can be mutually the same thing. And so I often say that I'm not inhibited by construction or materiality or building codes or zoning codes or any limitations. In fact, that inspires the work. I say I wouldn't know what to do with a blank canvas. I would just stare at it. I'm an architect because I revel and relish being creative within parameters, within budgets, within codes, within any limits. But it's always about pushing the envelope and also just caring about having a vision and manifesting that vision from the big idea to the smallest detail.
I think a couple of projects I've seen of yours, like you build around something that's already there, like a boulder in, was it Desert Courtyard House? I mean, you should touch on that a little bit. There was a giant boulder that they built a house around. And then also Christopher's, there was like a tree that was going to be in a courtyard. And I mean, it is part of the story, what you're telling with your architecture is the environment and what used to be there and what you want to keep there.
Well, and that's one thing I talk about is context as material and how we read a place and how we go to a site, and as most architects do, but it is really looking deeply at what are the existing assets of, let's say, a site that has never been developed, or let's take a site that is like the Dialog coffee space downstairs that is a TI within an existing building. I'm always interested in history, and that might be like the history of this building originally, 1001 North Central, or the history of a site, which is geological history or cultural history or natural history, which is the landscape, the flora and the fauna, and then what's there. And like what was so unusual about that rock in Desert Courtyard was it was a rock that was pointing to the most quintessential Arizona multi-layered sunset view that was the release of the house that we might get while creating a courtyard of serenity and privacy for this very, a client that wanted that. And so the house opens up at that point, and then the rock actually points to the view, and we called it Arrow Rock. And then one face of it was a perfect face for a fire. So we built a fire pit, kind of a fire circle around that rock. And then from the living room, you looked across another backside surface that was an arrow that pointed to the view.
Let's talk about this next project, which was your first project when you started your own practice.
Yes, the Dialog house and another house, the Urban Courtyard house, is how I launched my own practice. And so I left Bruder Studio in 96, and as I mentioned earlier, started my own practice in May of 96. And this actually was a larger design that the client wanted. Short story is we said it would come in over budget. We got permitted, but it was my only project that was moving forward. And so we redesigned it very quickly and did the documents, including the redesign, in 3 to 4 weeks.
What city?
Here in Phoenix.
Yeah.
And this was a large site that is just around the corner from my house in the kind of Sunny Slope area. Mm-hmm. And it had this kind of amazing view of downtown Phoenix where you were just a little above the horizon. So it kind of looked like the real city, like the skyline kind of stacked up with South Mountain and the Sierra Estrella Range in the distance. And so the idea of the house, it's I describe it with two hands. So there's the volume that looks to the city, and then the idea of putting a towel over your shoulder and going for a walk and descending into a pool space that took away the road that it was proximate to. And it was also about really expanding the extents of the site and not thinking the site is the property line. The site is Echo Mountain on the back and South Mountain in Sierra Estrellas and Piestewa Peak on the left, that the whole valley was the site. The valley floor was the site. And to extend the site in an axial direction from the upper volume and then with the pool, which you see there, and with refracted, wind-activated water light, it's like a fireplace. It's like always dancing and moving, or it's light that's doing that. And it was a cool volume out in the landscape, and then up the one at the top is a warm volume, and then the exterior is a dark stucco that blends again with the night. And so you're just left with these lit volumes that are in dialogue with each other, or warm and cool. And then that also was on the cover of our first full-length monograph, which was published about 6 years ago, I think, maybe a little longer.
Which we have here. We're going to have you sign this before we let you go.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that house really speaks to that whole experience, just in the way that you describe it.
I love and extending the site to what the views are in the city. It was really well.
Well, and it was gang nail trusses, it was stucco, it was drywall, it was masonry that was stained black. It was a very kind of low budget house, and yet a very very gestalt, very strong. It actually won a PA Design Award, which is a prestigious thing back then. That the design won that that was nice when you're launching your practice to win a big national award like that. Sure. So yeah.
What about Amangiri? Can we get to some of those slides?
That's one I wanted to talk about as well, because when we were on the phone and we were kind of going through some of these photos that you sent us, you talked about that reverse sunset and the place telling you what needed to be there. So
the story of Amangiri is first it's 3 young architects that were asked if we would collaborate on this project. We had actually been working on it with the gentleman that found this site, and that was Marwan Al-Said, Rick Joy, and myself, and also Michael Boucher was the landscape architect. This is the 4 of us actually visiting the site for the first time on a site that we had been visiting for a couple of years. And Adrian Zecca, the founder of Amman Resorts, had picked this site, which we had never been on, and told us this is the site. And we went there after that happened, and we were not sure at first, but very quickly we were like, oh yeah, this is the site. Mm-hmm. And this is us experiencing the reverse sunset on the cliffs and realizing that we already kind of knew about the reverse sunset. My house looks at Echo Mountain, another part of it at reverse sunset. Taliesin looks at the McDowell Range at reverse sunset. And so what that's saying is you're not looking at the sun setting, you're looking at the light setting on the opposite cliffs or mountains. And so this is us for the first time, this kind of dream team that has set up a studio, I-10 studio, to work on this kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, never having designed a hotel and being commissioned to design a hotel for the #1 hotel year in the world, and learn a lot from Adrian Zecca and his team. And our concept that was described on the top of a 60-story tower in Singapore at the end of a trip going to see the Ammans, Amanpuri, the original one in Phuket, Thailand, and then the 3 in Bali, and then later, and actually having Adrian Zecca take us around those resorts in Bali. And then he asked us at the China Club atop this tower, what did we think we might do? We pulled out a piece of kind of cast earth, and we said it might be concrete, but the idea is to create a kind of man-made ruin that is carved by the movement of the body instead of wind and water, and to re-inhabit that ruin. And so there was an idea of always engaging the landscape, and that became cast-in-place concrete that was cast using fin-form concrete that created a glass-like finish that acted like the silica sand in the cliffs because they were basically frozen sand dunes. It's actually very young geology. And so the walls and there's an image here where you can see the walls are reflecting the blue sky, or the walls are the cliffs. And then as the light changes in the later part of the day or different times of the day, the walls are changing with the light like the cliffs. And so like the early kind of people writing about this project was like the walls are all different colors. No, they're one color, cast in a specific way that reflects and refracts light akin to the cliffs. And then another idea was that there was this one, the rock we were told was the site, was an island rock, and there was this piece of the rock that pointed north toward Escalante Grand Staircase National Monument. And we decided to put the piazza of the hotel, which was the living, dining, kitchen, and pool, around that rock. And then 17 rooms on one side, that's more of a canyon experience, 17 rooms up to the spa, to the most sensual part of the site. And then the entry, which was, there was a sand dune where there was this bowl with that one rock that was pointing north. You walk up this very slow steps. Usually an Amman lobby has a work of art of the place, of the culture of the place. And we decided that the art was framing the landscape. And so you walk up a steeper set of steps, and then this is always changing. And that's looking to Grand Staircase Escalante National
So that's
Monument.
the art.
That's the art.
In the
As it
lobby,
should be.
essentially.
It
And then the
should be.
walls, you can see they're changing color and tone similar to the landscape.
It's stunning. It really is.
And what's really very interesting about this project, and we have other projects that are like this, when this was finished, Instagram had just started, and blogs and all this, and so it went viral. And I remember getting a letter from a daughter, a high school student that went there with her family, and she wrote her experience, and it was essentially the design narrative or the script that we had talked about that drove the design of the project, which we were thinking about experience and what would the memories be that people would take back to their loved ones. And really what went viral really was the word of mouth through this new medium, but it was people's experiences that kind of went viral. And she understood that the concrete was an abstraction of the cliffs and the landscape and a ruin and all these things. But she never had the script, and she got it at a kind of visceral or gut level. That's and great. I think that's the
sounds like she needs to get an architect.
Yeah, I know. Is she an architect?
No, but my point would be that architecture has the capacity to communicate at an emotional, visceral level, and you do not have to know anything about it to get it.
Yeah, so mission accomplished.
It's not like over your head. It's something we all can feel. It's just a lot of times what is built does not do that.
So she experienced exactly what you were hoping the guests would experience.
And there's another slide of the spa that is coming up, and another story is that there was this Navajo massage therapist that was showing us around the spa that we were seeing finished for the first time together at the opening. And she starts telling us about going into the treatment room when she interviewed, and that it reminded her of her grandmother's hogan. Oh. And she started crying, and we were like, we forgot that one. We were like, oh, that was the script for that.
Yeah.
And it was idea that the Navajo are out in the landscape all day, and the idea of, going inward in a massage or a treatment, and then coming back into the landscape rejuvenated. So this idea of a darker room and then going back out into the landscape. The rooms were, about everyone being low to the ground, and this kind of sophisticated camping, kind of circling the wagons side by side. We knew that we could create more privacy side by side as opposed to casitas in this landscape. There's nothing to hide one from the other. So it's best just to be together. We also knew economically that was a better way to meet the budget. And it was about framing that view. The bathtub is kind of a star bath at night. And, we spent time out on the rock, on this island rock, talking till midnight or later about these experiences. And that's kind of how we designed the project, was through stories and thinking of experience. The image, if you keep going, Marty, that I was referring to earlier, this is the spa. And then there is an image coming up. This is all the spa.
That's beautiful.
That's the kind of more sensual part of the site. And then this is that treatment room, and that is that massage. That, I forget her name. I'd have to open up my book.
That's the massage.
But that is the massage therapist that told us this story.
That's amazing.
So most importantly, how often do you stay there?
We were invited for the opening, and we were also invited to invite our friends for 50% off.
Do you still have that?
No, that was
man.
one-time deal.
Oh, it's
that
such
was a
bucket list.
one-time deal. And then I did celebrate my 60th birthday there for one night.
Okay. My
Because it's
girlfriend
really gone up a lot. It started out at $850 a night, and now
it's like,
the standard.
It's like $5,000 a
Yes,
night.
basically.
Yeah. I had a girlfriend actually got married there and does her anniversaries there.
Gorgeous.
But the photos are insane. All right, I would love to move on to something else that we've talked about recently, the Telescope House.
Yes. So the Telescope House was completed about a year ago. It just won Villa of the Year worldwide with the Plan Award out of Italy. And this is a very interesting project that a couple from Cambridge, Massachusetts, contacted us in May of 2020, and they wanted to maybe do a house in Sedona or Park City. They've been coming out to the West, hiking for 20 plus years, and their idea was to do a house that they could use as a quarterly retreat, and it would also be rented as a short-term rental in between. And so from the beginning, it was designed as a kind of DIY, do-it-yourself mini hotel that was about economic sustainability, and also they wanted to create an experience, and they wanted to be able to share that experience with other people. And they loved the counterpoint to Boston and coming out to the West. They had been working quarterly retreats before the pandemic, and they're young software designers, and they would go to different places just to mix it up and work there for 3 or 4 weeks. And so they had this very interesting concept that never had I had a client that had come to me with this kind of idea. So it was both designed for them as their future retirement home and their kind of forever home. But it would also be about sharing it with other people, and they wanted it to do both things.
And an income property, and it's pretty successful, right?
It is. It's very successful. It's Airbnb. The reviews are kind of sound like they're written by architects. Yeah. And they were going to look at sites. So we offered, I think this is important maybe for your viewers to understand maybe how the process of hiring an architect might work.
For sure.
They wanted to talk to architects. They happened to talk to us. We invited them to our studio. They said, we're going to go look at sites in Sedona. We said, send the APN numbers. We'll do some research. We'll look at the zoning. We'll look at what we can look at with the county. And then if you want, we'll come up and walk the sites with you. There were 7 sites, and the last site, the 7th sleeper site, was not for sale. It had been recently taken off the market. It was nearest the road. The driveway was very short. We walked on a driveway to a for sale pad, which was just red rock. We were between these telescoping junipers. Reverse sunset was happening. And the junipers were framing the view and bringing it closer to us. And that's where we put the house. So we listened to what the previous owner of the property had already recognized. And also that view shed happened to go down the newly realigned Red Rock Loop Road. And it would be preserved as a view in posterity. And so that, and now it took us a while to get an abandonment of a piece of road right of way and a couple other things so we knew we could build there. We did the design, but before we went into documents and hiring a contractor for pre-construction services, we got all that known that we could build where we were being told to build. And so the idea of the project is that it telescopes out to the view, which is Cathedral Rock with Munz Mountain as a backdrop. And at reverse sunset, every day this happens. And so the idea was to telescope the house out in plan and in section, up and out to the view.
And it does look like a telescope. It looks like a gigantic telescope.
And so it's a land-based telescope clad in Corten, weathering steel. And on the interior is post-consumer waste, FSC certified wood dust that is pressed into panels and pigmented black. So I call it shadow finishes that are a nice respite for the eyes during the day, but at night merges with this dark sky community. Also, like an old-fashioned telescope with no lenses, by framing something with a dark tube, you bring the view in closer. And as you could see looking down the hallway, where you can't even tell there are doors, that's a waxed finish. And it is reflecting the light and color of the landscape into the house down the hall. That image on the right is looking at the reflected light of the landscape on the edges of the door panels and wall panels that are telescoping out toward the view. So when you enter, you don't fully understand it. In fact, you don't understand where the doors are. The client's attitude was, it'll be fun. People can figure out the doors. There are little lights that indicate where to push. And then recently there was I don't read these often, but I was looking up a detail that I needed to know for some submission, an award submission. And somebody had actually were talking about how fun it was with the kids for them to find the doors just like the client thought would happen. I thought we might have to put a sign on the door, and they were like, no.
No signs.
And I said, maybe it's too extreme. You know, this is, but they were like, no, it'll be part of the experience.
Exactly. It's not like your typical Airbnb where there's labels on everything.
Yeah, and they did not. They were absolutely against that. There's one or two important signs, but the rest, they were like, no, it's in the manual. They'll figure it out.
So if someone wants to stay or find this home, on Airbnb, could they just search telescope?
Google telescope house. And you'll see all the awards. You'll see Airbnb. They have their own website they've designed for it too. But it was a really interesting thing is because you're kind of designing a hotel that is not, there's no person there. There's a manual. It's this new world we live in, right? And where people can create a business and they can, share. And I'm not just saying that. They really genuinely want to share this. And I think there's an article coming out soon in one of the local magazines, and the writer was saying, they're sharing this.
Yeah.
It is pretty amazing.
It is. I think what award did it win? We were at, was it the AIA? Did it win a citation award?
It won a Distinguished Architecture Award, and
your client was in town. I think I met.
And the contractor and the client, all of us were on stage, and
it was so cool. Well,
and
thanks
this
for
was
this.
constructed by Roots Design Build, Mark McCullough, incredible crafts person, and a great team. It's penultimate craft. Chris Madsen has a company here that does the best cabinetry in town. The interior of this house the entire interior is a cabinet. There's no drywall. The floors, walls, and ceilings are one material, either waxed and buffed, or lacquered.
We might have to do a bespoke retreat there, ladies.
Seriously.
We're running a little bit out of time, but Marty, if you go down to the bottom slides, I think it's really interesting. Brittany and I, when we were starting this podcast here at this Dialog, we toured a lot of podcast studios we wanted a nice space for our guests to come to and be able to hang out downstairs, get coffee before they come up and do the podcast with us. And we did not know that you had done the interiors of our studio where we shoot at the Dialog. So I don't know if you want to touch on that or not, but we'll put a couple of photos up. I just think it's such a coincidence that you're the architect.
And part of the reason, other than our amazingly wonderful team here, was that it was that walking in and that experience of this would be a good place for our clients to come and our guests.
Well, this is for very good friends, Chad and Sean, that own For the People, that was until recently in my building that I own at Central and Camelback at 5102 North Central Avenue. And they wanted to do another space, and they came up with a new concept called Dialog. And they got what I consider probably the best space on the ground floor here at 1001, which is not on Central Avenue, but it's on Row.
Yeah, can you
it's
go up
on the
slide?
alley. It's on the parking garage. It's connected to the lobby.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's the light rail. It's like this very active corner in the most active arts district and most successful arts district in the country. And so we had this very long space that had 4 entries, one from the street that we see with this image. That ramp goes up to an entry, one from the parking garage, one into the main lobby, and then one from the lobby, and one from the elevator lobby. I think it's 5 entries.
And a speakeasy down below.
Yes, that's another thing. Yes. And that's pretty cool. But, our idea was, the brilliant idea that I think it's Jonathan, I might get that name wrong, Jonathan Vetto, right? Was to reverse the silver reflective glass. He just turned it around. So the ground level is now open to the street and you're not looking at yourself.
Like it.
And we just wanted to amplify that feeling, the full length of the building on this side. And the idea of just doing a white interior where it's a different idea that the objects are the thing that are objectified and presented on a very neutral background. So the floor, the walls, and then the ceiling looks white, but later in the evening or earlier in the day, you notice it changing, and it's a very light shade of celadon that makes the space a little more dynamic. And the idea of putting coffee at the lobby near the parking garage, entry, and the lobby, but also pulling people the length of that space in through the what they're selling and what they're presenting. And so, and then this idea, we use the back of Bunky Boutique boutique to do this kind of Taschen bookstore that's also part of this, that projects the what's being sold to the street like the old Circle K's did.
So we enjoy it every week, so thank you.
We do. I feel like the coffee is kind of the heartbeat of that little area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is kind of this kind of coffee colored bar counter that is, that is the one counterpoint to the white space. Yeah.
All right, we're going to do some rapid fire. You ready?
Yeah.
One word or
Yeah,
one phrase to answer.
Okay. What is your favorite movie?
In the Mood for Love.
Right. Who's your favorite architect?
There's too many.
Sometimes these are hard.
There's too many. I wouldn't say any specific architect. That's a hard one.
Hard one.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be not telling the truth to pick one.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Okay. What is your favorite piece of architecture?
That's easier. There's probably, I don't know, top 10 houses and top 10 buildings. One of my favorite houses is Ray Cappy's house in Los Angeles in Rustic Canyon. Ray's no longer with us, but a house that is impossible to photograph. And I've taken probably 1,000 students there and other colleagues, and every architect, every student, almost anyone you take to this house, they're just amazed by the way it works with its site and just the way it feels.
What's it called again?
It's the Cappy Residence.
Cappy Residence.
Kappe. Ray Cappy, basically started with a few others. SciArc, the architecture school in Los Angeles. Another building would be Sigurd Leverance. I mean, if I had to pick an architect, I would pick Sigurd Leverance, Swedish architect, relatively unknown until about 35 years ago, virtually unknown.
What's his name?
Sigurd Leverentz, and he had a very interesting life, very early work. Some of it was, he has a long trajectory of work. I took students there.
Oh.
God.
That's okay.
All right, since we are probably like 90 minutes in.
Sigurd Leverentz, later in his career, did this chapel near, it's Klippen and near the town Malbo that is across from Copenhagen. And the idea was, it was for a congregation, and so the material was brick, and the rule of the brick was you can't cut the brick. And it's brick floors, brick walls, and brick ceiling with some steel. And but the reason he didn't want to cut the brick is he said every brick represents the congregation. And, there's other stories about that building. I took students there. We got an amazing tour. That tour was kind of about immersive experience in architecture.
We'll have to look them up.
Yeah.
And Allison Franta was one of my students on that trip. And it was about visiting sites for like 4 to 6 hours in most cases, and seeing only a few buildings a day.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We do plan to have you back another episode to talk about some of your commercial projects also.
Yes.
And different things.
Yes.
Great.
But thank you so much for coming on with us today. We are going to link all of your contact information in the show notes, but if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners where they could find you most easily.
My website, Wendell Burnette Architects, and you can send an email, and also I love still answering a phone call.
Perfect. We do too.
So do
we
we.
do too. Not many people in our profession do. But.
All right, that is it for today's episode of Modern Home Mastermind. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and rate us.
Thanks to our guest for his insights and to you for learning about everything modern with us.
And if you're ready to take the next step in your real estate journey, please reach out to us at Bespoke Real Estate. And until next time, keep living, loving everything modern.